All right, so first of all, thank you so much for having me here today. I have to say, I am completely honored and humbled to be able to talk to all of you. First of all, many of you have had an incredible impact on this airplane, on the A-10, and will continue to have a huge impact for its future. For everybody else that's working on other airplanes out there, we couldn't do it without you. I mean, that's the bottom line, is we do what we do downrange and in combat because there's people back here taking care of our airplanes to make sure that they can fly under any circumstances. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about my experiences from both Operation Enduring Freedom in Afghanistan and then also Operation Iraqi Freedom, most specifically. So September 11th, 2001, looking around the crowd, I think most of you probably remember that day. You'd be surprised. There's some young audiences I talk to now, and September 11th, 2001 isn't something that they remember like the rest of us do. But September 11th, 2001, I was at Davis-Monthan Air Force Base going through my initial A-10 training. And we were flying nights, and so I was trying to sleep in, adjust my sleep schedule, and got a phone call, which was surprising, to get a phone call when you're trying to be in crew rest. And it was one of the other guys from my class, and he said, turn on the TV. And so I did, turn on the TV, and right about then, the second airplane hit the World Trade Center. I think in that point in my gut, I knew we were under attack. I think I also knew that my life as an A-10 pilot, my career as an A-10 pilot, was probably going to change dramatically. I finished A-10 training in December of 2001, and just a few months later, I found myself flying my first combat mission in Afghanistan. Next slide, please. So this is Bagram Air Base, Afghanistan, 2002. Like I said, this was my very first combat experience, was flying missions in Afghanistan. You can see there, not much facilities. We lived in tents. We ate MREs. We showered at, you could call it showering. We used basically a bombed out building as our shower facilities, which basically meant like from a kitchen sink, the hose you would have. And that was it. And that was okay because we were fighting the mission. The runway itself, the reason we sent A-10s there is because A-10s are durable, they're reliable. And so even though the runway, half of it was shut down most of the time because there were holes and craters in the runway, and at night we'd fly under night vision goggles and we would see pieces of rock about the size of a baseball down the runway. And so the testament is really to the airplane. I mean, it's a durable airplane and it can go to those type of conditions, and we never missed a single combat mission. But that just goes to show you, this is not anything new or different. Right now, we have A-10 pilots that finish their A-10 training, and months later, they are flying combat missions in Iraq and Syria. So it's incredibly, incredibly important, one, to get that training, but to realize how quickly we're sending our young lieutenants out to fight the nation's wars. Next slide. So we finished up in Afghanistan, and a few months later, we found ourselves in Iraq as part of Operation Iraqi Freedom. We were actually stationed in Kuwait at the time, which is where our aircraft were. But these were two back-to-back combat deployments for me. And I will tell you that the thing that got me through those deployments, and I think the thing that connects both of those deployments for me, are the guys you see in that picture. And I will tell you, there's no greater bond than going through combat together and realizing that the guy next to you, you have to rely on each other to get you through the combat deployment and to get you through each mission. And so that to me was incredibly important. Next slide. But it wasn't just about the pilots, it was about our maintainers too. These guys were awesome. They were so fired up to be out there. They were out on the line 24/7 to try to make sure that our jets could fly under any circumstances. They were just as excited as we were when we'd come back from a mission. They'd hear about it. They wanted to know what we dropped, what we shot, what our mission was, and what our targets were. And one example that, for me, that testifies just this, kind of the pride that these guys took in the mission, we would get alarm reds in Kuwait, and alarm red was an indication of an incoming missile from Iraq. And one day I was getting ready to launch, and we're moving as fast as we can, and we get the alarm red. And at that point, we're supposed to launch. Our crew chiefs are supposed to don their chemical gear and run to the nearest bunker. So we get the alarm red, and we're moving as fast as we can. My crew chief's pulling pins as fast as he can, and I'm getting ready to launch. And I look over at him, and he is standing at attention and saluting me in the middle of this alarm red, because that's what he does. He takes pride in what he does. And I saluted him back and he ran to the bunker. But that just a small example of how important what we do is, and that it's a true team effort. Next slide. So I'm going to talk a little bit about a mission I flew in April 2003. On this day, the way we were working our missions was that we would, generally we would take off without a tasking. We would fly about an hour north to Baghdad, and then we would refuel. So we would be full of gas, and then we would wait. We would wait to get a tasking. It was called a close air support stack. The weather this day was probably 20,000 feet broken. Couldn't see the ground below. We would occasionally see holes. And so we really didn't think that we were going to have any effect on the battlefield this day. But about maybe 10 minutes of waiting, kind of talking back and forth with my flight lead, we got a call on the radio. At the time, we called them ground forward air controllers. They're now called JTACs. But we got a call from him saying they were taking fire and needed immediate assistance. Also with that ground forward air controller was Lieutenant Blocher. He's not a lieutenant anymore, but Lieutenant Blocher was also an A-10 pilot. He was a member of my squadron. But one of the things we did before we went to Iraq was we sent about 10 young lieutenant wingmen out to go fight the war on the ground with the Army. And he just happened to be out there that day. He was supporting the 3rd Infantry Division. And this is him in this picture. So he was on the ground. I didn't know it at the time when we got the call for a troops in contact. Troops in contact is one of those things when you hear it, the hair on the back of your neck stands up. It's a serious call for fire, which means our guys on the ground need help and they need it now. And so we're going to go out there and we're going to take that risk. Next slide. So we got the call for troops in contact situation, and I'm not going to even pretend that I can reach up there, but you see the bridge in the top of the picture. And what we were told is that members of the Iraqi Republican Guard were on the east side of the Tigris River, and our guys were pinned down waiting for support, and they were on the west side of the river. We could see little kind of holes below the weather, so we couldn't see much, but we thought maybe we could get down below the weather and help these guys out. We were going to do whatever it took to help them and get down below the weather. Not every close air support target is as nice as this, and I say nice because there's a river that delineates friendlies from enemy. It's not always that clear, but in this case for us it was. Next slide. So these guys you see here, these were the guys on the ground calling for fire. Like I said, they were waiting for resupply, and members of the Iraqi Republican Guard were shooting rocket-propelled grenades into our guys. I will tell you that any A-10 pilot will take this risk. This is what we do. This is our bread and butter. We support the guys on the ground. And so as we approached the target area, my flight lead said, well, I'm going to take a spin down, see what I can do, get below the weather. And he did. He was able to get down below the weather, and he said, all right, keep your jet moving and get down below the weather. There's a small hole. You can stay on the east side of the Tigris River. I'll stay on the west side. Keeping your jet moving is kind of just a natural thing that we do when there's a combat environment. And so it didn't surprise me until I got down below the weather. And right away, I could see the firefight going back and forth across the river. And then I started to see the puffs of smoke coming up around me in flashes. And it was that instant that I knew that they were also shooting at us. And so we decided that we were going to take a couple passes of 30 millimeter on the enemy location. We were trying to get underneath an overpass. You saw from that picture, this is downtown Baghdad. I mean, this is an urban environment. There are cars driving across the overpass. And so we're really trying to be as accurate as we can by getting down underneath that overpass, low altitude, and shooting the enemy. So we made several passes of 30 millimeter, and then we also decided to use our high explosive rockets. Because of the way the overpass was designed, we could only come in from one direction and come off a direction, so we were very predictable. And we're also hanging out below the weather. It's not a situation that any pilot wants to be in, but we were willing to take that risk for the guys you see here on the ground. Next slide, please. So we made a couple passes, and at this point we're talking together with my flight lead, and we decide that it's time to climb up. It's time to get out from kind of the threat area that we're at. We made a couple passes. We feel like we've taken some of the burden off. And at this point, I'm coming off target on my last pass, and I feel and hear a loud explosion at the back of the airplane. I knew immediately that I had been hit. I mean, there was no doubt in my mind. The jet pointed nose low. Obviously, all this happened very quickly, but I also remember a lot of things. I remember looking down kind of through the cockpit at low altitude, kind of seeing Baghdad getting closer. I remember looking at my ejection handles thinking, I really don't want to eject where we were just strafing Iraqi Republican Guard. And then, you know, kind of everything focuses in on the master caution panel, the flashing lights, and what's actually happening. My training kicked in. I did not have time to think about this. I did not have time to pull out a checklist. I looked at the hydraulic lights on the panel. They were both on. And I looked at both gauges, and both hydraulics were at 0. So it was instantaneous. When I got hit, the hydraulics were gone. And at this point, my options are very, very few and far between. So I'm going to either pull the handles and eject, or I'm going to flip that switch to go to manual reversion and hope that it works. And sure enough, it did. I flipped the switch to manual reversion, and everything worked exactly as advertised. I felt like I had a little bit of control back on the airplane. And at this point now, I have a handful of jet just trying to, one, get away from the ground. They're still shooting at us, and I'm trying to fly an airplane. I never really knew what flying in manual reversion was like. People explain it like driving a dump truck without power steering. It flies, and it works, and I was incredibly thankful that it worked on this day. Because manual reversion isn't something that we test or train to on a regular basis. This is kind of tested initially, and then it's not something that we check when we get out to the jet every day. So I am incredibly thankful for the people that designed the airplane to make it last and survive in these kind of conditions, but also to our maintainers that made sure that that jet could fly under any circumstances. So now I'm climbing out and away from Baghdad, and the jet's starting to respond a little bit. I feel like things are a little bit better under control. I let my flight lead know that I've been hit, and he's talking to me at this point about all the things I need to do. So he's talking to me about continuing to put out chaff and flare because they're still shooting at us. He's also talking to me, I explained that I can't climb very well because at this point, like I said, we had just got gas, we're heavy. We have Mark 82s on the airplane, we have Mavericks, we have rockets, we have an electronic countermeasure pod on our left wing, and the airplane is heavy. You know, the airplane itself is just, it's trying to climb out from low altitude with all that weight was just heavy. So I emergency jettisoned all my ordnance. I did it in a left-hand turn. Some of the ordnance hit the left side of the airplane. I didn't know it at the time, but we could see the cracks in the airplane once I landed. But he's doing great things as far as a wingman and what a wingman would do and provide that mutual support and helping me to get out of that situation. So now that we've kind of climbed up a little bit, I'm feeling a little bit of relief, like I might actually make it out of here. We're talking about what we need to do. He's trying to convince me to go west. I just want to go south and out of Baghdad. But in his mind, he's thinking I need to go west because that's where the good guys are. That's where our guys are. And if I have to eject, at least I'll be over the friendlies. So we're starting to make our way west and then south out of Baghdad. And at this point, you know, my focus is really on flying the jet and getting the jet to where I feel like it's a little bit more controllable. He's also trying to rejoin me at this point. We had been across the circle, so maybe about a mile, mile and a half apart. Neither of us saw the missile at all. We had no indications, and we never saw it coming. So he rejoins next to me, and he rejoins on my wing and to take a look at the damage. At this point, I just have my the caution lights in the cockpit. I know I've got no hydraulics. I try to adjust the mirrors to see back there, but I can't see anything. And so he pulls up next to me in the airplane and says, well, Casey, you've got a hole about the size of a football in the right horizontal stabilizer, and then hundreds of holes in the fuselage and tail. I had no idea what to expect. I mean, that didn't sound great to me, but I really didn't know what to expect or the extent of the damage. But the airplane was flying, and that was the important part. So we're flying south now to get out of Baghdad. And now we start the long process. It's an hour trip home. We're going through several emergency checklists. And I know at some point he's going to either ask me a question or talk to me about whether or not I'm going to land the airplane. Flying in MANREV is one thing. Landing in MANREV is completely different. I had had the privilege of hearing from some pilots that had flown in Desert Storm. And these guys had flown in MANREV. And I was tracking 3 stories from 3 different A-10 pilots that had flown in manual reversion. And I remember the first story. The first story was of a pilot that attempted to land in manual inversion and pulled the power upon landing. The nose dumped, and he cartwheeled down the runway and was killed. There was a second story who had a pilot that had learned from the first. We don't pull the power on man rev anymore when we're landing. So he learned that, got the airplane on the ground, and then realized he had no brakes, no steering, nothing was working, swerved on and off the runway several times, and he was lucky to survive, and the airplane was destroyed. And then there was this third story that was battle damage very similar to mine, and the pilot was able to successfully land the airplane. So I had all of these stories in the back of my mind, but in the end I knew that it was still going to be a decision for mine to make. But after flying the airplane for an hour, I felt pretty good about it. I felt like I had a very experienced flight lead with me. The airplane was flying good. I had an hour to think about it, and I decided that I was going to try to land the airplane, knowing that if I needed to eject, I could, potentially last minute. Next slide. So this is actually a picture of me in aircraft 987 coming back from Baghdad. The Air Force Times happened to be out on the ramp that day doing a story, and so he captured some pictures, which is kind of nice to see. You can see there's nothing left on the airplane except for the electronic countermeasure pod on the left side. We had just downloaded our AIM-9s because there wasn't much of an air threat. The problem with that was with a heavy left wing, the jet wanted to roll left the whole time. And so when I was flying back for this hour, I remembered what the guys had told me that had flown a Desert Storm. And what they said was, hey, when you fly back, make sure we trade it off on hands. So we'd fly left hand on the stick, right hand on the stick, both hands on the stick, because it's exhausting. And flying it for an hour, I followed their instructions, and I felt like I was ready to land. I felt very comfortable with trying to land this airplane. I had found out when we started making our way back in, there were a lot of people that were there to help us out. So we had our rescue guys, our rescue helicopters on alert in case I had to eject. There was an idea that I could at least get back to Kuwait and potentially eject in friendly territory. So our rescue guys were on alert. We had a supervisor of flying. It was an F-16 guy, and they decided to swap out with an A-10 guy just so we had the maximum level of experience. We had A-10 Sandy pilots. Sandys are combat search and rescue pilots that were out. They were ready to go in case I had to eject. And so there were a lot of people there ready to support me in case things didn't go so well. So we're making our trip back now. We also made a decision to overfly a base in Iraq that we were at the time. Part of that decision process was they didn't have a very robust crash and recovery capability. There was one fire truck, and whereas in Kuwait at Al Jaber we had crash and rescue, we had Marine firefighters, we had ambulances, we had hospital capability, and so if worse came to worse, we could at least land back home. So now I've made the decision. I'm going to come back in. We feel like we have a lot of things going our way, and that I basically have been on one heading all the way from Baghdad all the way south. Very experienced flight lead. Kuwait, you kind of get the standard dust storms and haze, but everything winds-wise was all down the runway. And so I felt very comfortable with trying to land the airplane. We did all of our emergency checklist controllability checks. It turned out when I actually slowed down and got the gear down with our alternate gear extension, that the airplane started flying better at the slower airspeed. And so I felt very comfortable continuing the approach in. So came in to start my landing approach, and there is a note in the checklist at the time that talks about ground effect when you get closer to the ground. And sure enough, this was probably, other than the original impact, was probably where I wasn't sure where things were going to turn out. And that was when I crossed the landing threshold, the jet felt like it was going to roll over on its back. But I was able to counteract that and put the airplane on the ground. I'll tell you, that was the best landing I've ever done, period. I don't care how it looked, it was the best landing I've ever done. So got the airplane on the ground, and now I've got to do basically every other emergency procedure as well, as far as emergency braking and no steering, anything like that. So, but everything worked exactly like it was supposed to. Was able to stop the airplane and get out of the jet. The fire crews met me at the jet, the wing commander met me at the jet, and now I just wanted to get out and see what the jet looked like. Next slide. So that's part of the tail of aircraft 987. We think a missile impacted somewhere near the right horizontal stabilizer. impacted and then sent shrapnel both into the tail and then the fuselage. The dark area there is the honeycomb, and my flight lead said that the whole way back from flying, he could see pieces of the airplane coming off in the air. He never told me about that, which I'm very thankful for, but he could see pieces of the airplane coming out. Next slide. So that's the fuselage section of the airplane. I was able to kind of climb into the airplane once we opened it up to take a look at it. And the right hydraulic line was completely sheared. I mean, it was just completely gone. And then the left hydraulic line had a hole enough, big enough that it just depleted the system instantly. And so lucky hit, I guess, on their part. As you know, the A-10, as far as, everything's spread out and separated, this is probably the one area where we get narrow and our systems are close enough together. So lucky hit on their part. I say lucky for me as well, obviously. I'm still standing here today to talk to you about it. You can see all the guys in the picture. Those are all our maintainers. I think one of the things that was really cool that I found out about afterwards is when the call went out that a jet had taken battle damage, it was an A-10. People kind of figured out the unit. At some point, they figured out the call sign and they figured out who it was. Pilots and maintainers went out to the line to welcome me home. And so there were a lot of people there waiting for me when I landed. Next slide. So that's the right engine. I never had any indications that there was a problem with the engine. I will tell you, my flight lead asked me probably, 10 times on the way back, how's your number 2 engine? And I kept thinking in my mind, I'm not going to say this to my flight lead, but I kept thinking, fine, why do you keep asking me? I have enough problems. Well, the truth is that's why he was asking. And he said occasionally there would be things that looked like they were coming out of the engine. But this engine operated exactly like it was supposed to and never had a single problem the whole way back with the number 2 engine. I think manual reversion single engine would have been a very different story. So again, awesome engines and very happy that we have 2 of them. Next slide. So that's the back tail of the aircraft. You can see it's charred, it's covered with hydraulic fluid. At some point this thing caught on fire. And I have no idea. I never had indications in the cockpit. We think probably when the missile hit, it was kind of that instantaneous. But the skin of the airplane was soft to the touch. And so at some point, again, it's an amazing airplane that it can take this much damage and still keep flying. Next slide. All right, so these are my crew chiefs. When I landed, like I said, the wing commander met me at the jet. And we all looked at the damage. And then he said, well, Casey, where do you want to go? And I said, well, I probably should go back to my parking spot. So instead of taxiing my A-10 back to my parking spot, the wing commander took me back to the spot. And these are, like I said, these are my crew chiefs. Randy Andrus on the left launched me out that morning, and Ian Morris on the right was the guy that was waiting for me. And, like I said, these guys were always so excited about the mission. And Randy had launched me out that morning and had said, man, make sure you bring that jet back with nothing on it. I mean, he's talking about dropping and shooting everything. Well, I brought it back with nothing on it. It's because I emergency jettisoned it. And then Ian, I kind of walked up to him and said, really sorry for bringing your jet back like this. And, as Ian would do, and I think as any other crew chief would do, he just said, man, we're just happy you're back safe. But these guys did awesome work. I mean, that airplane flew exactly like it was supposed to and brought me back home. Next slide. So this is my flight lead in the picture. He's also the squadron commander, Lieutenant Colonel Bino Turner. After we landed that day, he said, you need to call your parents. And I thought, no way am I calling my parents. First of all, we're in Kuwait, we're flying in combat. And, back in the day, digital technology wasn't exactly what it is now. And so I just thought, well, I just won't say anything until we get back home, hoping that, not to disturb my parents in California in the middle of the night. And he said, no, I think you should call them, which meant, Casey, go pick up the phone and call your parents. And so I did. I woke up my parents at 1 in the morning and was told that I couldn't tell them exactly what happened, but that I should just tell them that I was okay. For those of you that are parents, I suppose you could imagine getting a call from your child who is flying missions in combat just to say they're okay is a bit of a surprise. So I told my parents I was okay. I said I was very happy to be flying the A-10 and that's really all I could tell them. And my mom and dad afterwards said they kind of looked at each other like, do we go back to sleep now? What do we do? And it was a good thing I called. So my dad is also, I'm a graduate of the Air Force Academy. My dad also happened to be a graduate. And the next day, he got some pictures emailed to him. there was no captions, really no description other than, hey, look what happened in Iraq yesterday. And I just happened to be off to the side in one of those pictures. And so it was at that moment my dad learned what had happened. So happy that I got to talk to them and let them know that I was okay. But Bino was a great flight lead. He provided me with a ton of mutual support. When we talk about wingman concept, this is it. He helped me get back. He also helped me get in the air the next day. So we had a kind of a decision as far as what we would do. And one of the things we do in the A-10 is not just close air support, but we also do combat search and rescue. And that's where we sit on alert. In this case in Iraq, we would sit on alert and wait for a call. Well, on the next day, we're sitting alert. We're actually sleeping out in the alert shack next to the airplanes, and we get a call that an A-10 pilot had been shot down. And sure enough, it's right back to the same location where we were at. I didn't have time to think. I got in the jet very quickly. We ran out to the jets, got everything started, and launched. At this point, we're really just trying to learn as much as we can about the situation, where the pilot is, where he went down, what shot him down, what rescue vehicle is going to come pick him up. We make it about 30 minutes into Iraq, and we're told that we can turn around because he had been picked up by some American ground forces. Telling an A-10 pilot to turn around when there's a guy on the ground is a pretty tough thing to do, and my flight lead said, we'll turn around when we're confident that he's been picked up. And so we spent a little bit more time going into Iraq and then got the confirmation that he, in fact, had been picked up by ground forces. But that was my next sortie, so it was great to get back in the air, to kind of get back on the horse, if you will, after that situation. And I owe a lot of credit to my flight lead for kind of helping me get through that tough situation. Next slide. So this is aircraft 987 as I last saw it all together. They sent, I say they, it was probably somewhere here. We were talking about this a little bit on my way. There was a team that came out to try to fix the airplane. It turns out there were too many holes. I saw, there were a couple patches that had been done, and I think the decision was made that there was it was too much of a difference in weight and balance, and we wouldn't be able to patch everything up in theater. So as any good maintainer would do, they canned this airplane to no end. I think they took everything out of the airplane that they could before it got chopped up in pieces and sent back in crates. So it was reassuring for me to know that at least we got some good use out of it, but a little bit sad to know that this was my flight, and aircraft 987 was its Finney flight. Although I would say it had one hell of a Finney flight. Next slide. All right, so that's just one of the stories. I mean, I know this story got a little bit more publicity. It's been a long time, though. I mean, this was 2003, so 14 years for me. I say sometimes it feels like I'm telling somebody else's story, but I also remember this very vividly. But I will tell you that this is just one of many of these stories. There are A-10 pilots out there right now who have just finished training and are flying in Iraq and Syria and doing amazing things. But we couldn't do it without all of you. And this airplane is impressive. It's awesome. It's reliable. It's durable. But it wouldn't be that way if I didn't have the people here. And so when Eileen asked if I would do this, it took a little while to get me here, but the answer is 100% yes, because it's my opportunity. And I know all of you weren't here in 2003, but in some way you've contributed, whether it's the A-10 or some other platform. Just know that in some way you've contributed to this mission. You've contributed to keeping pilots safe, and you contributed to the fight that we're fighting downrange. And so this is my opportunity to just say thank you to all of you for that.
So, ma'am, we just wanted to thank you for coming here. We really appreciate it. So, we had a couple tokens we wanted to give you. So, first we have our squadron shirt here.
I love it.
The 571st, Wild Hogs on the back.
Very cool. Thank you.
We have our coveted 571st A-10 coin for you.
Coveted. I love it.
And this, if you want to, we actually want to give that to you for your husband, just so he can wear our squadron hat as well. But thank you very much. We appreciate you sharing your experience. It's really important for these guys to see what they bring to the fight for people that are actually battling. So,
absolutely.
Thank you very much, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you, guys. Thank you.